Now, the basic logic is actually utterly clear and can't be disputed at all. The logic of austerity simply is, well, if you take out the credit to spend it on whatever, you have to pay back the credit. If you spend the money you lend from the banks in such a way that it doesn't increase your income so that you're not able to pay off your debt, well, then you have to do some real belt tightening, meaning you have to give them the collateral. So whatever you have to sell to bring in some money to get rid of that debt. Well, if you tried or if you ever took out the credit and were unable to pay it back, you know this is working exactly the way. Of course, it doesn't work the same way for everybody. There's the ones who are too big to fail, they never pay back anything. And of course, then there's also the ones who are too small, too low in the first place, the ones who never would get credit in the first place. But there's a lot of in between, those who do get credit and those who have something to take to the marketplace in case they're running into difficulty serving their debt. And this is exactly the point where austerity gets a bit more difficult or more complicated than austerity advocates would ever admit, because the ones who are prescribing the belt tightening are not the ones who will feel it themselves, and the ones who will have to tighten their belts are not the ones who are running the big tabs. The ones who are running the big tabs are, of course, the governments, but behind the governments there's a second line of really big spenders, that's of course large corporations and the really wealthy families. Those two corporations and rich families, they're actually responsible for all the government debt. And this is true for two reasons. The one is very straightforward. It's called tax cuts. If you have lots of money, you also have lots of power, and you have your friends in government. And even if they're not really your friends, in case a Social Democrat ever gets elected, you still tell them what you do, and chances are that they will comply with your demands, and you do get your tax cuts. Well, everything else being equal, cutting taxes means that you're running into debt problems. But there's also a typically untold story about government debt. And this is that for the last 30 years or so, government policies, finance ministries, central banks are actually enticing private companies and private households to take out lots of credit. And to mask the debt, every credit you take out obviously increases somebody's debt. To mask this increase of debt, at the same time you blow up financial bubbles. So you create an illusion of wealth. If you take out the credit and you buy all kinds of assets, paper wealth, you think you're fucking rich. And if you think you're fucking rich because you have all these assets, you of course also expect to earn something just on the fact that you own these assets, whatever they are, which means you have more credits, more debt, more financial assets, more profit expectations. And these profit expectations are, of course, feeding the bubble of financial markets. So starting with credit, you blow up financial bubbles, credit expectations, and at some point somebody will not be able to pay back all the credit taken out to feed this bubble. And as soon as that happens, the economy freezes, and that's the hour of the government. When the economy, the private economy freezes, for example, like it did in 2008, 2009, governments appear as the lenders and spenders of last resort. They do take on board lots of unpayable private debt. They do have to kick in some money in order to stop the downfall of the economy. And in consequence, they end up with all the debt on public balance sheets that had been on private balance sheets before. And this is the door opener for austerity. You need government debt to have an excuse to start austerity policies. And this, for private businesses, of course, is a way of life. It's a good business model because, as I said earlier, if you can pay your debt, you have to sell something. And this is what we see in each round of austerity. Something that's still in public hands has to be sold to private companies who then cherry pick and take those parts of public assets that they think they can run profitably. And if it turns out they can't run them profitably, well, that's not too bad. Either it's not a problem because then you blow up another financial bubble, you produce another financial crisis, and the next round starts. It's kind of a crazy cycle, and it goes for quite some time.